What was your father telling you at the time?
My dad is a human rights activist, and he was probably the #1 enemy of Putin because he's responsible for freezing Putin's money around the world.
Maybe 10 years or 20 years, what do you think is going to be your core driver?
I want to help the next generation of founders. I'm proud to be an interviewer for Teal Fellows, help out with Z Fellows as well. I really love to relive the journey.
You made an app and stole the IP of the sandwich shop.
Pret a Manger didn't have an iPhone app. So I went on their website and I ripped off all of their IP, all of their logos, put it into an app, put it on the App Store.
So did you meet anyone during this time when you were at Stanford?
I'll tell you 2 stories. The first is I had breakfast with Mark Andreessen. The biggest thing he said to me was Andreessen Horowitz will be our first pre-seed investor. And then the second is my interactions with Warren Buffett and what I've learned from him.
Do you remember what you asked him?
He told a story that he's never told before in public, which is
Today's guest is Joshua Prater, the founder of Do Not Pay, the AI-powered platform finding everything from parking tickets to subscription fees. Originally from the UK, Josh is a Teal Fellow, a Stanford dropout, and is an amazing friend of ours in Origins. Truly one of my favorite episodes. Origins is brought to you by SemiAnalysis, the leading research and consulting firm for AI infrastructure and buildouts. They work closely with many hyperscalers, AI labs, hedge funds, and semiconductor companies that you know and respect. From tracking the inference economics of model deployments to every data center and the supply chains for fabs, servers, electrical equipment, and more, SemiAnalysis is an expert on the topic. If you want to learn more or work in the industry, visit semianalysis.com to see their research and purchase their models. Thanks again to SemiAnalysis and founder Dylan Patel. Maybe you want to start with a bit of your early years growing up in London, who you want it to be like, what it was like growing up there.
So I grew up in London and taught myself to code around age 12. And this was before the days of Codecademy and Replit and X. And so the only way you could teach yourself to code really was with YouTube videos. So I was watching these Stanford iOS development YouTube videos, and I became involved in the world of jailbreaking and selling apps and themes on the Cydia App Store. And the lesson it taught me was you can build something and have leverage as a young person. You didn't have to ask someone's permission to sell a theme. They didn't know it was a 13-year-old building these themes. And I started getting serious sales selling the themes, and that was really exciting for me.
Maybe touch a bit more on what it was like growing up with your dad and having the Russian mafia chasing you guys and how that impacted your endeavors and your drivers to sort of go against the system.
Yeah, so my father, neither of my parents are very technical, so they didn't know anything about Cydia or iPhone apps. But one thing they taught me was to fight for what you believe in. My dad is a human rights activist, and for a time he was probably the #1 enemy of Putin. Thankfully, he's been downgraded maybe to number 2 or 3 after Zelensky, which is good as his son these days. And I think the reason he's so high up on the enemy list is because he's responsible for freezing Putin's money around the world. And that really angered the Russians. And it really puts things in perspective, having the Russian mafia after your family. They've actually come to the house. My parents get these really scary phone calls. There are arrest warrants around the world for countries that are allied in Russia. Like, for example, I remember I was a Stanford sophomore and I got a call late in the evening and my dad was just arrested in Spain. And I was really worried that they would get him back to Russia. Thankfully, we managed to get him out. In any case, all of this taught me that it puts things in perspective. In life, there are always ups and downs, and especially building companies and projects, it feels like eating glass sometimes, but nothing compares to having dangerous people after your family.
I guess just to touch on Russia and the Russian drama, what was your father telling you at the time?
He was very paranoid, and this really conflicted with what I wanted to do. I wanted to build an online presence on the internet, build internet friends, and it's probably not a good idea to start building internet friends if you have the Russian mafia after you. And so I was actually even rebelling against my own family to kind of build this online presence with my various projects.
Can you touch a bit more about the early stories? You made an app and stole the IP of a sandwich shop, and eventually, they realized you were a young high school student. Touch a bit more on that.
Yeah, so I was had the early success with the jailbreaking Cydia App Store, but I realized it was 100 times bigger market to operate on the Apple App Store. And so I was looking into apps or websites to build if kind of for a bigger market. And this was back in the day where if you had an app, it was truly groundbreaking. I feel like the world has gotten a lot more competitive. I posted this on X, but I felt like um, back in those days, if you knew how to build an iOS app, you were in the top 5% of young people. Today, there are young people, even like 16 to 18-year-olds, making millions in revenue. But back in those days, and building an app was very innovative. So I was looking at all the different apps available, and I noticed that my favorite sandwich chain, Pret a Manger, which is a very big chain in the UK, and they have some US presence as well, didn't have an iPhone app. So I went on their website and I ripped off all of their IP, all of their logos, trademarks, um, put it into an app, and I even like kind of hacked some of their APIs and things like that to get the menu and other things. The world was so much less competitive back then. You could even charge for an iPhone sandwich app and people would buy it. And so I charged, I think, 99 cents and put it on the App Store. And it actually got featured by Apple. And Apple, when they feature your apps, they make you sign all these things saying you have the copyright. I just signed it all. And it got featured in the What's Hot section. And then that led to it ranking. And the sales were just coming in. Now, of course, the sandwich chain began to notice that there was this app that ripped off everything that some random teenager was making money off charging people for. And they were actually getting complaints. They were like, why are you charging for the sandwich app? And and so I got all of these angry letters. Their general counsel got involved. But so they invited me to their office to discuss, probably to threaten me and sue me and all of this stuff. But I got to the office, and I think they finally realized this was a harmless like teenager, not some evil company ripping off their IP. And so we decided to actually make it the official Pret iPhone app. And this taught me a valuable lesson at an early age, which is it's best to ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And the app's been updated many times since then, but I'm proud to have built the official iPhone app.
Yeah, I've used it hundreds of times. It's a fantastic app. I guess if we could touch on University College School and your time there, and how would you describe yourself? And
Yeah, it's the perfect entrepreneur school because it's just good enough that if you want to go to the US and go to Stanford, you can do that. But at the same time, it's not one of these super academic schools where you don't have any time to build your own projects. So it's like a school where you can make the most of it. And um, I have a friend. He missed so much of high school, but he got his parents to make a deal with the school that if he took the final exam, whatever score he got in the final exam would be his grade for the year. And um, I think that really sums up what it's like a university college school. You can put in the work and then just go to school to like build friends and learn about the world.
Who are some of these friends? Who's this friend in particular? What do they do now? If you're still in touch with them.
So this goes back to like if you knew how to code, you're in the top 5%. Um, I had like 2 or 3 friends who knew how to code, and they were like my closest friends. They're working on startups now, actually, in Europe.
Awesome.
I think there's a lot more opportunity though in the US.
Was there any time when you were younger where you were particularly scared or, even more rebellious where you said, I'm going to go online, and maybe it backfired or maybe it went better than you expected?
I learned very early on that not to trust people reaching out online. I've actually had like Russians reach out to me online. And so I think it's probably helped me. Maybe the reason I haven't been hacked in one of these crypto scams is because I was early adopter of having these scammers and nasty people message me. My great grandfather was the head of the American Communist Party. And he actually went to federal prison. He was kind of like a victim of the deep state even back then. He was like more like an RFK figure, like stealing votes from one of the parties when he ran for president. And um, I think it's constantly run through the family.
How did your mom impact you early on? What was her role in this, all of these, experiences?
My mum was an actress, and she was an orphan. And it really taught me the value of kind of being frugal. And my grandmother was a refugee from the Nazis as well. And I remember growing up with my grandmother, she would like take the salt packets from restaurants because that is just out of habit. even though towards the end of her life she was comfortable,
Mhm.
she just couldn't shake that habit off from her childhood. And I think the same is true from my mother. And so for me, I've always been extremely frugal. My company is called Do Not Pay, and I joke it's not just a company, it's a lifestyle. And I actually think both my parents had a big impact. You have fighting back plus being frugal, and I feel like the founder market fit is perfect.
Those are quite positive takeaways, and it seems you have a good lens on life accordingly. Are there any ways that you had been detrimentally impacted and you sort of had to learn, or there was some level of trauma that you had to go through to where you could actually then gain these outlooks and conclusions?
I have like dyslexia and dyspraxia growing up, and I think coding was like really my outlet to kind of I wasn't very academic, and so I had to really like push myself to actually find something that I really was passionate about. And I think when I found coding, that really made me happy because I was before like 13, like I would go into English and I would hate English, and I would feel like I'm a failure. But I felt like with coding and engineering, um, that was finally something that I really enjoyed and was good at.
Was there someone you looked up to at the time who was a coder?
I think it was more like dyslexic and dyspraxic, like entrepreneurs, like Richard Branson. There aren't that many successful entrepreneurs in the UK. Um, I, I I think today the most successful UK company is Revolut, and maybe the second most successful is Deliveroo. So you have a bank and a like Uber Eats style delivery service. Meanwhile, in the US, it's like OpenAI, SpaceX, all of these really inspiring examples, and it's so much more inspiring to be here in the US.
Yeah, so I guess we can segue into that. And you going to Stanford? How'd you pick it? Had you been here before? How did that happen?
So I visited a few times, but the real thing that sold me was the YouTube videos. I was like, if this is what the YouTube videos are like, one can only imagine what it's actually like to go there in person. And they start these Stanford classes on YouTube with like they zoom in into Palm Drive. And that's the like which is like so magical, especially when it's like raining outside in the UK. So I know it sounds vain, but the initial reason I wanted to go to Stanford was just because of the weather. Um, and then I got here and it was a dream come true.
What ways?
So the first thing I noticed was there were like loads of people like me. In the UK, the biggest pinnacle of success is if you get a PhD at Oxford. The high schools are literally measured by the number of people they get to study at Oxford in academia. And the US is so much more entrepreneurial. So I remember walking into my dorm and there were people working on startups and projects and all of this stuff. And I don't think it's as entrepreneurial as it should be, but it was a night and day difference with the UK.
What do you say to kids who are young now, who might be in similar situations, who actually might not get into Stanford, who might not have the opportunity to leave from the UK to US or go to Stanford? How do you know, guide them? What would you tell them in regards to keep at it, to keep going?
Well, it's not really about Stanford. It's about being in the right place, and anyone can move to the Bay Area.
Mhm.
I mentor and angel investors and founders now, and I tell them that the second they move to the Bay Area, their valuation triples. And there's an amazing founder who we all know. He moved from Canada, and now he's doing amazing things. I think his valuation went up like 10x when he moved to the Bay Area.
Do you think that's good or do you think it's bad? I would argue there's a number of companies in the Bay that are inflated or have gotten overly capitalized and almost to a detriment.
I think it's a shame, but that's just the way the world works. Um, it's a variety of things. I think the Bay Area is such a boring place that the only thing that people can focus on here is building and work. And it's also such a boring place that you can meet anyone. If you look at New York or London, society is a lot more stratified. The most successful people are in their country clubs, but here they're just like, oh, do you want to go for a hike or do you want to play pickleball? And they're much more open to meeting new people.
So did you meet anyone during this time when you were at Stanford?
After Do Not Pay first went viral, I had breakfast with Mark Andreessen, and he really convinced me to make it into a company because initially I wanted to make it into like just a website nonprofit. But he really convinced me that the biggest impact on the world organizations are kind of capitalist for-profit companies.
Touch a bit more on meeting Mark Andreessen. Did you spend multiple hours with him? Did you meet him multiple times? Who else did you meet that also had a drastic change and impact on your perspective?
I got outreach from him. I went, and this was like a dream come true for me because I was outside the bubble coming from London. I was fresh off the boat from the UK, uh, and we spoke very philosophically about non-profits versus for-profits, and um, how to have a bigger impact in the world. Um, I still and he the biggest thing he said to me was, Andreessen Horowitz will be our first pre-seed investor. Um, and um, and another thing he said is you can take it slowly. I think to your point about the Bay Area and companies being overhyped, companies go into YC, it's demo day, it's go, go, go. And they act and they get into permanent decisions that they can't reverse. And they go in a direction that might not set them up for success. But with me and Do Not Pay, I actually decided to stay at Stanford for 3 years and actually figure out why this company hadn't worked in the past for other businesses. And I think that's a question every entrepreneur should ask. Why hasn't this worked before? Why now? And it could be a technical change, or it could be an approach that someone previously hadn't taken.
Do you think that was something that came as a surprise, or were you already on that path and he sort of, gave you the little extra push, or was that a drastic change from your perspective?
It was a drastic change. At the time, Do Not Pay, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I love doing these projects and stuff, but I never really saw myself as like a founder of a company. And Do Not Pay only went viral by accident. I got a lot of tickets and in the UK and then at Stanford, and I built it just for a few friends, and then it went viral on Reddit. And I thought, wow, maybe there is something to this idea.
We have to touch on the tickets. I'm really curious how they happened. Do you have a good one anecdote you can share?
Well, I'm all over the place and just so busy with school and my projects. So I would just like, these signs would be so confusing. They would have like two signs that say the opposite thing. And you see these viral posts, and I've seen it go even crazier where you have 5 signs on top of each other. And it's okay for me. I'm not a very sympathetic person. I'm just like this like coder guy. But I think for old people and homeless people who sleep in their cars, it's just a money grab. And if you look at New York City, they make over $1 billion a year just from tickets, all types of tickets. And maybe they should make that money from elsewhere instead.
Yeah, I guess we have to touch on Teal, and I'm curious why. Do you know why he backed you and how that went down? I haven't heard that story.
So I applied for Teal in my sophomore year at Stanford, and I got rejected. And the reason I got rejected was because I had no direction. And at the same time, so Do Not Pay was going completely viral. We had a lot of users, and we had a lot of press coverage. CNN was writing articles about us. And so not only for Teal, but for also the other investors, I thought it was a slam dunk pitch. And so sophomore year I got rejected from Teal, and then kind of junior senior year I was trying to raise money because as far as I could get on my own, the server bills were very expensive, and I probably needed to hire some of my smart friends to keep it going. And so I went down Sound Hill Road and pitched Founders Fund, Index, all of the top VC firms, and one after another they were all rejecting me. And it was really stressful because at this point I was close to dropping out. I was not knowing what to do. Do I just give up? And I pitched like 18 or 19 firms, all rejected me. And I had 1 or 2 pitches left. And if these 1 or 2 pitches rejected me, I basically would have to give up. Because as fun as it was that Do Not Pay went viral, it couldn't be a real business without us raising money. And I'd maybe have to join like another company or completely change direction. And so there was this lawyer who's this very famous lawyer in Silicon Valley. His name is Damian Weiss. He's a partner at Wilson Sonsini. And I brought him on as an advisor, and he believed in me. And so I went out. I was too young for drinks, but we went out for coffee. And I said, I've got 1 more pitch, 1 or 2 pitches left. Everyone's rejected me so far. What am I doing wrong? And he said, well, show me the pitch. Do a mock pitch right now. So I went through my entire pitch, and he said, you're doing it completely wrong. You have to make 3 changes. The first is, no one really cares about the deck. This is a pre-seed company. They care about you and the product. So the fact that you're not doing a demo is a huge missed opportunity. You should include a demo. And so I quickly scrambled a demo for my pitch the next day. And the demo was actually a robot logging into someone's bank account to appeal their bank fees. The second piece of advice he said is you want to put in the logos of the biggest companies that you want to one day be like. So in my case, it was Intuit because it's a $200 billion company. We say with Intuit of consumer rights. We put in Honey, which got acquired for 5 or 6 billion from PayPal, and another one that I can't remember. And then the third thing he said is you want to leave the business model more open. And this was at the time when we said, well, maybe we're going to be like Facebook, and I will grow up watching The Social Network. And so it was very fashionable to have like a free company and, have a product ad-based monetization model. And he said, you should let them imagine the business model rather than you being prescriptive in the deck. And so nothing changed about the company. I made those 3 minor changes to the pitch. And the next day I went pitched this firm, and it was like a night and day difference. Like night and day. And not only did they invested on the spot. Like I did the pitch and then they gave me an offer on the spot. And Silicon Valley is such a close-knit community. Once you get one offer, everyone, even the people who previously rejected me, were flooding in. And I think it taught me a valuable lesson, which is if something's going wrong, sometimes even minor changes in strategy can make all the difference, even if there's no changes to the substance.
Are there any other stories of the sort when you were younger where something would go well and then minor changes, big outsized impact?
I think so. I've always been very anti-authority, but it does help to align yourself with people who have the same interests, even big companies. So I'll tell you 2 stories. The first is with IBM. So we decided to do not pay. We had some issue with like reading parking signs. We wanted to improve our parking ticket product. And so we used a very basic implementation of the IBM Watson API. And just in passing to a journalist, I said, oh, we're using this Watson API to like read signs and things like that. And someone at the IBM marketing team read this article and they said, wow, someone's finally using IBM Watson. We finally have one user. And they like invested, no exaggeration, $10 million in a nationwide co-marketing campaign. And overnight, like I was in Times Square and all the billboards with do not pay, the power of Watson. And so aligning yourself with a big company is really helpful. And you're seeing this today, even like Devon with Microsoft and OpenAI with Microsoft. The world is such a tough place. The more allies you have, even big companies, the better. And then the second is kind of my interactions with Warren Buffett and what I've learned from him.
Please do tell.
So I was sitting in a Stanford computer science class one day, and I got this email, and the subject line I still have it to this day. It said, do you want to have lunch and interview Warren Buffett on stage in Seattle? And this was very early in my Stanford journey, maybe like 3 or 4 months. And so I thought that this must be a scam. This is probably some phishing email. But the class ended, and so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to call the number at the bottom of this email. So I phoned up, and this lady picked up, and she said, nope, I work for Microsoft. We're hosting the Microsoft annual investor and founder conference, and we actually have a tradition where we fly a college student out to Seattle to interview Warren Buffett on stage. And it's a cute tradition, and for some reason, we've picked you. And I was still very skeptical, but the lady seemed nice. And so within a few weeks, I was on the plane to Seattle to interview Warren Buffett.
I know you're very worried about not asking him something unique. Do you remember what you asked him?
Yeah, so I was really worried. I try and not be like an NPC, like a non-player character, like an AI character in a video game. I want to always be unique. And I was really stressed because Warren Buffett's been asked everything, books, TV shows. So I was getting on stage with him, and even a few minutes before our supposed discussion, I didn't really know what to ask him. And so I kind of defaulted to something unique to me, which no one else could ask him, which is I asked him with some shameless self-promotion. So we got on stage. I was sitting right next to him, And I introduced myself and what I was doing with fighting back companies and governments. And I said, what is one time that you fought a big company and you fought for your consumer rights? And he was a bit taken aback because he was expecting like a question about what to invest in or something. But he told a story that he's never told before in public, um, which is the first ever lawsuit he was involved in. When he was my age at the time, maybe like 21 to 25, um, this was before the days of credit cards or things like that. But he was a subscriber to Harper's Magazine, which still exists to this day. And back in those days, they didn't charge your credit card, but they sent you invoices every month. And if you didn't pay the invoices, bad things would happen. So you had to pay the invoices. And they weren't canceling his subscription. He would phone them up and say, stop sending me the invoices. He wrote to them by mail. They wouldn't, and they just kept sending him the invoices. And he was so frustrated by this because he didn't want to have his credit ruined and all of this stuff that he sued them in small claims court. And not only did the court rule in favor, he represented himself, but he also got punitive damages of a few $100s. And this really taught him to fight back. And it taught me one valuable lesson, and it inspired one of my Do Not Pay products, which is 60 plus years later, people still can't cancel their subscriptions. And so I decided to build a more modern version of what he did, which is a credit card that you can use for free trials, and you don't have to worry about canceling because it's not linked to you.
What's a mistake you made maybe very early on that now you vow to never make again, or to pay for it and tell other people not to make?
The biggest thing I think is we didn't start charging until 2019. I started my website in 2015, and 4 years in, we didn't have a business model. And I think it's really helpful for two reasons to have a very clear business model where people are paying you early on. The first is that you can track your progress very easily. I'm an angel investor in founders, and every week they can say, okay, this week we grew by 20%, or this week we added X number of revenue. And having that KPI in 2019 really like supercharged the company. And then the second thing is working for your customers and having incentives aligned. I mentioned earlier I was open to like this Facebook business model, but I realize in hindsight it's much better to work for your customers or the people that you're building value for.
You come from a strong family of academics, and I guess also communists. How did they feel when you left school?
There's it's a cliche, the first in your family to attend college. I'm the first in my family without a PhD. Even my dad has an honorary PhD. So my grandfather and his two brothers, it was very competitive brother dynamic. My grandfather was head of maths at UChicago. His brother was head of maths at Princeton, and third brother was head of maths at Brown. And um, they were all working on a similar area of maths as well. And so it was extremely competitive and it was cutthroat. And sometimes they wouldn't even talk to each other for a while. And I was like a mediator between them. And so it was very daunting, not being as academic as them. I've met some of the greatest mathematicians in our era, like John Nash. I wasn't alive when Einstein was their friend, but they were close with Einstein. Um, and but I do think the world changes, and everyone has a unique way of making their mark. And I think I told my grandfather passed away a few years ago, but I was telling him about what I was working on, and I think he approved of it. So.
So, I guess what would you tell teenagers today? Should they go to college? Is it futile at this point?
So I think there's this misconception where people see their life in steps. So if I do this, I can do this, and then I'm prepared to start a company. But the problem is that the world is changing so quickly that these predefined paths no longer work, and you might as well just learn on the job and do it now. So I do think there is some value to college. There was some value for me, which I can talk about, but you shouldn't do college if you see it in this path of steps. You should just do what you ultimately want to do. So if you ultimately want to build a company, just build a company today.
Yeah, I guess just touching on that linear path, what did you foresee yourself doing when you were, let's say, when you were a high school student?
I wanted to maybe be an engineer. I wanted to build really cool software and things like that. I really love like engineering and coding. I didn't really know that you could just build a company without going to college.
Were there any peers of yours at Stanford also building companies? Was this sort of a solo journey you were undertaking, or were there friends doing the same thing? Were they supportive, unsupportive?
There's a handful of people that have gone on from my class to build great companies. So, for example, Tanay has built Athelus, which merged with another company at a multi-billion valuation. But it was really surprising, even at a place like Stanford, the number of people that just wanted to go into consulting, investment banking. And I suppose these days, maybe being a venture capitalist is the cool job. And that's really the advantage of the Teal Fellowship. When I got the Teal Fellowship, it wasn't really about the money. The 100K was nice, but um, there were finally 19 other young people who had the same challenges as me. And one of my biggest challenges was I was, I think, 20 or 21. I was interviewing a 45-year-old engineer. And so that was, I think, one of the first questions I asked one of the Teal Fellows in my class. How can you convince a 45-year-old to work with you? And he said, well, he was just working on a 60-year-old because he was on deep tech.
So how did you?
I think it's really about aligning what the company wants with what you want. So, and I see this to this day with interviews. So what does a 45 to 60-year-old want? They want stability. And so even as a young founder, I said these things like, well, do not pay. We're getting revenue in now. Starting to like really be a sustainable business. We're not burning very much. We have a lot of runway, and we embrace the do not pay lifestyle. And like, that's like aligns with the goals of a 45 to 60-year-old. When I'm hiring a hotshot 19-year-old classmate or Stanford student, the pitch is very different. It's like, we're growing so quickly, you're going to learn so much. In 3 months, you'll be doing something even like 10 times bigger than what you're doing now. And so you really have to align what the company needs with what the candidate wants.
Touch a bit more on Do Not Pay itself. This headcount is still quite small. Revenue is exceptional. And
Yeah.
you guys were one of the first companies to issue private dividends. Maybe give us a bit more on that.
Yeah, so I think being both consumer and enterprise companies, 50% of the VC dollars, it's a well-known statistic, goes to Google and Facebook. And I think the rest, at least in the olden days, used to go to SF landlords. And that wasn't helpful for us. And so we decided to really try and grow organically. And we found the power of SEO in doing that. Where we wrote thousands and thousands of articles and guides on how to fight for your rights. So, for example, how to fight for a United refund. And these would rank for free on Google. And people would, and every 3 paragraphs, there'd be a big button saying, let do not pay, do it for me. And of course, everyone's so lazy, they click the button. And so because we've had all this organic growth, this really allowed us to be very profitable. And separately, we managed to automate a lot of our operations, first with software and now increasingly with AI. So, for example, someone comes to us and says, I lost my parking ticket appeal. Can I get a discount or a refund? We have AI process that on customer support. And so we have a very small team, but hundreds of thousands of customers, and that allowed us to pay dividends and be profitable.
And I know when you did that, very many people were opposed. Again, you going against the system. Tell us a bit more about that situation.
I spoke to a lot of founder friends and mentors, and they said a company like Google would never pay a dividend. Interestingly, a month after we paid our dividend, Google did pay for its first ever dividend. And I think that this is my biggest kind of philosophy. You constantly have to be paranoid and observing around you, and times are changing. And I think at least when we paid our first dividend, employees and investors really valued kind of liquidity and profitable businesses. I think now we've gone more into a growth mindset in the market, and so we're adapting for that as well.
You mentioned the word paranoid. You said the same exact word describing your father in his
Yeah.
early days and your early days. Are there other instances in which you were paranoid and it's done you well, maybe in your family as well, your grandparents, your father, etc.?
I think it really runs in the family. My grandmother left Austria when the Nazis just came into power in Austria, and she had the foresight to leave, thank God. And you constantly have to protect yourself in a world where there are evil people and people trying to scam you, and ruthless competition.
But I guess getting to today, how would you describe yourself? And I guess where do you see yourself going? You're 28. You've got so much time ahead of you.
It's really 2 things. I see Do Not Pay as my life's work. I think with AI, I started my company as a template business, and now with AI, a lot more is possible than previously wasn't. And then the second is I want to help the next generation of founders. I'm proud to be an interviewer for Teal Fellows, and um, help out with Z Fellows as well. And I'm investor in more Teal Fellows than anyone. And I really love to like relive the journey and help other people as well.
You mentioned before we started that one of the outlier things you've seen recently are the founders and people who are young having Minecraft servers. Touch a bit more on that, or what you look for in people you invest in, what stands out as outlier.
I think that young founders make much better investments and founders than older ones. And the reason is they have everything to lose. So I've seen this play out in real life. If you give a young founder 100K, the first thing they'll do is they'll build the product. If you give a hyped Google engineer some money, first of all, they're not going to take 100K. They want to get 5 million. And second, they won't build the product. They're going to hire like 5 of their colleagues. And then those 5 will want to hire 5. And it's just like a endless Ponzi scheme of hiring. Um, and that's not good. And these young founders have a much more frugal lifestyle, and they're just much more focused. So going back to this like amazing founder we all know from Canada, he like sleeps 2 hours, he's all in, and I would much rather back him than someone else.
As would I. Yeah. I guess touching on your family, what were some of the salient pieces of advice that they gave you that you could share with other people?
I think anything is really possible in this world. You see people raise like hundreds of millions to build like Sam Altman trying to like raise 1 trillion one day for his chip data centers, and it's a mindset of agency, and that's really what my families, all of them, have really done. Like my grandfather, because his father was a communist, he was like untouchable in the academic world, and he really had to scramble to even be a mathematician. He was worked at a gas station because the military wouldn't give him an exemption from the draft because of like political prosecution. So I think you just really have to push for things you want in the world, and the same is true with my dad, like passing laws and things like that.
It's amazing. What do you think will be your driver in the future? Maybe when you were younger, it was that you wanted to sort of go against the system and do your own thing. Now it's that do not pace your life's work. And maybe 10 years or 20 years, what do you think is going to be your core driver? Backing young people, you're still curious about the world at that point. What really drives you?
I want to create more founders. I think I was in the right place at the right time, watching these Stanford YouTube videos, coming to Silicon Valley, meeting the Teal Fellowship and things like that. But I think there's like thousands or hundreds of thousands of young people who are being stuck in these endless mind-numbing journeys just because they don't have that opportunity or don't see what else is available. So I want to create more of those.
How do you think luck plays a factor in starting companies, maybe in your life or those that you've backed as well?
I have this expression, it's easy to be lucky. I think plays a huge factor, but if you create enough opportunities, the luck will happen. For example, when raising money, you only need one person to say yes. So maybe you get lucky and the conversation goes really well, but if you talk to enough people, you create that luck.
It's awesome. And maybe if you could summarize the advice you'd give young people in a few sentences, what would you tell them? Maybe somebody at Stanford, or maybe a student still at UK, or maybe somebody who's 12 learning to code at this point. What would you tell them? And what would you say to empower them?
I would say, uh, please, you should have started yesterday. And also focus on a product and focus on something you're very passionate about. Keep going back to this, but I really hate authority, and I'm the type of person to wait on hold for like hours to save $20, and find something like that you're passionate about. In this world, there's so many things that are exciting. Maybe it's AI or crypto and all of this stuff where it can be easy to get caught in the hype cycle and focus on the technology versus the problem. But I think focus on something that you're solving for yourself, because then at least you have one customer.
It's just to close. I'm curious what you would title a book on your life.
Um, I'm not sure what the title would be. I think I have lots of good stories. Um, I just need to like close out Do Not Pay in one way or the other, and then I have the conclusion, and it will be a great book.